Okay, Hare Krishna. We will continue our discussion on the third chapter of the Bhagavad-gita from verse 17. So the previous section that we ended essentially talked about the importance of a person who is full of desires to execute prescribed duties. Right? We understood that prescribed duties are called yagyas, and the cycle of yagya has been given by Lord Vishnu or Krishna himself. So when one executes these prescribed duties, one is also implicitly following the instructions of the Lord, and therefore also making gradual purifications. Now in the next set of verses, Krishna will talk about the importance of executing prescribed duties for even those who do not have material desires. Okay, so let's do verse 17. Yastvatmaratirev sayat atma triptascha manavaha atmane eva cha santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. But for one who takes pleasure in the self, whose human life is one of self-realization, and who is satisfied in the self only, fully satiated, for him there is no duty. So we see that now Krishna has changed the context of what he is going to be speaking later on, right? So in two verses he is going to talk about the knower of the self, Atmarati. Right? So we could understand the progression that a person who is full of desires performs sakam karma, and then purified by the process of sakam, the person reaches the platform of nishkam karma, where he performs activities without desires. The nishkam further purifies and elevates one to the stage of Atmagyan. Now this verse is describing a person who is at that stage. So these are the symptoms: takes pleasure in the self, life is one of self-realization, satisfied in the self. So very similar to the symptoms of the Sthita Pragya that were described towards the end of the second chapter, that such a person has transcended sakam, nishkam, reached the platform of Gyan, and for him Krishna says there is no duty, because the person has realized the soul. Baldev Vidibhushan says that the person has realized the 8 qualities of the soul. Now remember, there is no difference between the person and the soul, so that's why it is self-realization. So what are the 8 qualities of the soul? That the soul is sinless. It can never be contaminated by sin. Because if the soul was contaminated by sins, then there would be no need for the purificatory process of the Vedas. Because the contamination is external to the soul is able to execute the purificatory process. It's kind of like a person is wearing clothes that are dirty, and then the person then changes the clothes and puts on new clothes, right? So the intrinsic quality of the soul is that it is sinless, it is ageless. So we already read that. It is deathless. We already read that. It is without grief. It is anandamai. It is without hunger. It's without thirst. It is blissful, and all its desires are instantly fulfilled. Right? So a person who is at that stage of Atmagyan has no longer the need to perform any activities, and this includes prescribed activities also. Okay, next verse. Verse 18. Neva tasya kritanartho na kritane hakaschana na chasya sarvabhuteshu kaschid arthavyapashrayah. A self-realized man has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of his prescribed duties, nor has he any reason not to perform such work, nor has he any need to depend on any other living being. So, Krishna in this verse is setting the stage for something that he will speak more elaborately in the next set of verses. So in the previous verse he said that a person who has self-realized has no need to perform his prescribed duties. Why? Because the whole purpose of execution of prescribed duties is self-realization. The whole purpose of sakam karma, nishkam karma is atmagyan. So if a person has already reached atmagyan, there is no need for him to perform prescribed duties. But now Krishna also introduces this clause that nor has he any reason not to perform such work. So the quality of indifference is not rejection. Like indifference means the person is not positively or negatively impacted by it. So whether he performs his prescribed duties and gets results out of it, or whether he does not perform the prescribed duties, the person is the same. Right? So kritena means that he performs his prescribed duties but is not bound by the results. And akritena is that he does not perform his prescribed duties but he is not contaminated by any sins. Right? So because of this position of equanimity, the person may perform the prescribed duties or may not perform the prescribed duties with the same impact on it. And later on Krishna will say that since they are the same, the recommendation is continue to perform your prescribed duties. Now expanding a little bit on the obstacles by non-performance of prescribed duties, in the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, it is mentioned. So this is in 1.4.10. It is mentioned, the Atma which men know is not dear to the Devas. For only one who has realized the Atma, even the Devas do not create obstacles, for the Atma also becomes dear to them. So the first proposition is the Atma which men know is not dear to the Devas. This is reflecting the situation of the aspiring transcendentalist. So if a person is aspiring for elevation to the stage of Gyan, then the Devas will punish him for not performing the prescribed duties, because the person still does not have Atmagyan. So then the first clause is mandating that until you are at the platform of Gyan, you should perform your prescribed duties, else the Devas will punish you. The second clause says that for one who has realized the Atma, even the Devas do not create obstacles, because at this stage the person has transcended the need to perform prescribed duties. And Srila Prabhupada extends this to devotees also. Prabhupada says that a Krishna conscious person does not take shelter of any person, man or demigod. Whatever he does in Krishna consciousness is sufficient in the discharge of his obligation. Right? So one thing to also note here is when Krishna says that Kaschidarth Vyapa Shraya, that he does not depend on any other living being. So even for a person who is self-realized, the injection is that one should not depend on any other living being. And this again steers one back to the importance of continuing to perform prescribed duties, even if those duties are minimal, even if those duties are only sustenance karma. But advancement in spirituality is not an excuse for one to become a parasite. Say that, okay, now you guys feed me, you guys take care of building a house for me. Right? So that's why Krishna said there is no need for him to depend on any other living being. And how does he protect himself from this dependence? By continuing to perform the prescribed duties, but with full detachment from it. Okay, so we continue to the next verse. Verse 19. Tasmadasaktaha satatam karyam karma samachara asakto hayacharan karma paramapnoti purushaha. Therefore, without being attached to the fruits of activities, one should act as a matter of duty, for by working without attachment, one attains the Supreme. So Krishna starts this verse with therefore, tasmad. So indicating that this is a conclusion. So what is it the conclusion of? It is the conclusion established in the previous set of verses about the importance of performing nishkam karma. So Krishna says, therefore, having understood the position of an Atmagyani, you should still continue to perform your prescribed duties without attachment. So from this verse 19 till the next 14 verses, till verse 32, Krishna will give 3 reasons why a self-realized person, an Atmagyani, though he has no need to act, it is recommended that he still acts. So the first reason is given in this verse, that paramapnoti purushaha, that through this process the person will attain the Supreme. Then in verses 20 to 25, Krishna says that one should continue to perform prescribed duties to set an example for others. And 26 to 32, in the 7 verses, Krishna talks about the need to perform prescribed duties to properly relate to an person who is still sakami, who is still attached in ignorance. So what is this particular verse talking about? That without being attached to the fruits of the activities, satatam means continuous, that this is the prevailing mood. Right? So the question is that if a person is not attached to the fruits of the activities, why should he act? So Krishna says, karyam karma samachara, as a matter of duty only. Right? And what is the result? Paramapnoti. So paramapnoti is the supreme destination of Atmagyan. That's been described in the previous two verses. And Srila Prabhupada explains that for a person performing devotional service, this verse talks about attaining the Lord. The conception there, of course, is not Atmagyan, but Paramatma Gyan. Right? So that is the highest perfection. Okay, moving on to the next verse. Okay, verse 20. Karmana eva hi samsiddhim ashita janakadhayaha loka sangram evapi sampashayan kartum arhasi. Kings such as Janak attain perfection solely by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work. In the previous set of verses, Krishna was glorifying the the execution of prescribed duties, even for one who has attained perfection here. So this verse is building on that theme, but it also adds another clause. So the first half of the verse is essentially resonating with the theme that was built in the previous verses, that by nishkam karma one attains atmagyan, right? So the point that is made, that karmana eva hi samsiddhim, that only by the performance of karma samsiddhim one attained perfection, right? Now the acharyas also note that eva, which means only, is applicable when the perfection is referring to knowledge of the soul. However, if perfection is referring to knowledge of Krishna, then only the performance of prescribed duties is not sufficient. That one needs to also include the angas of bhakti, like Shravan, Kirtana, Smarana, Vandanam. But considering that Krishna is speaking more in the context of Atmagyan, so let us look at that verse from that perspective. That he gives the practical example of King Janak, who is the father of Sita Devi, that simply by nishkam karma he attained Atmagyan. Perfection in this case, let's assume it's Atmagyan, so he attained Atmagyan. And then the second part introduces the new theme that Krishna wants to speak about, which he says that therefore, for the sake of educating the people in general, you should continue to work. So, what is explicitly missing over here is an understanding of the position of Janak. That Maharaj Janak, even though he was perfectly situated in Atmagyan, he continued to perform his prescribed duties. So he was a king, he was ruling the kingdom, he had a daughter or daughters, he married them, he was performing different kinds of sacrifices for the welfare of the people. So everything that is prescribed to the king, he was doing it. Right? So that's why Krishna says therefore, which means just like Maharaj Janak, who, even though he was perfectly situated in Atmagyan, continued to perform his prescribed duties, you should also perform your work. Why? For the sake of educating people in general. The Prabhupada says that kings like Janak were all self-realized souls. Consequently, they had no obligation to perform prescribed duties in the Vedas. Nonetheless, they performed all prescribed activities just to set examples for people in general. Right? So the message is that if prominent personalities were relinquishing the prescribed duties, then the others would artificially imitate them. Now, personality like Janak, they were properly situated in Atmagyan, but that's an internal consciousness. But others who are less advanced may not be able to appreciate that internal consciousness and have reached that state, but they will relinquish their duties. They will say, just like the great Maharaj Janak has relinquished his duties, so will we. And this would create a disturbance in the social order. Next verse. Verse 21. Yad yadachrati shrestha tat eva taro janaha sayat pramanam kurute lokastadanuvartate. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. Verse 21. Yad yadachrati shreshthas tatta devataro jana sayat pramanam kurute lokastadanuvartate. whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So, Krishna is generalizing the example that he gave in the previous verse. Right? There he gave specifically the example of King Janak, and now Krishna is saying that great men are leaders and kings and gurus. So whatever actions they perform, the common men will follow. Right? Yajat ajtati shreshthas. So why do the common men follow? Because they look up to these great men. So once again, the emphasis is on following prescribed duties. Because even if the great men, the Shreshthas, have no need to perform prescribed duties because of the level of advancement to Atmagyan, but if they were to give up these prescribed duties, that's the standard they will set. And that's what the common man will follow. Right? So this is also negating Arjun's objection that by going to war, I may cause the downfall of society, the Varna Sankar, right? And Krishna says, actually by not going to war, you will cause the downfall. Because others will say that the great Arjun, he ran away from the battlefield. He did not do his duty, so it is okay for us to not do our duty. So Prabhupada says that people in general always require a leader who can teach the public by practical behavior. Right? So these are known as acharyas. So charan means behavior. So the role of an acharya is to preach by word and by example. So they cannot say, like Prabhupada says, that a leader cannot teach the public to stop smoking if he himself smokes. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that a teacher should behave properly before he begins teaching. So one who teaches in that way is an acharya or an ideal teacher. And in the next verse, Krishna will use himself as an example. Verse 22. Name prahashati kartavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana nanavaptam avaptavyam vart evacha karmani. O son of Pritha, there is no work prescribed for me within all the three planetary systems, nor am I in want of anything, nor have I a need to obtain anything. Yet I am engaged in prescribed duties. So in the previous verse, Krishna used the example of Maharaj Janak. And Arjun may wonder that will people actually try to imitate somebody who is so exalted? And Arjun is including himself also, that he is an exceptional personality. He is a powerful warrior belonging to the great Kuru dynasty. So would people really want to imitate him? And Krishna says that what about you? People even try to imitate me. Right? So Krishna says, who am I? That I am not in the want of anything, nor do I have a need to obtain anything. Right? So indirectly he is saying that I am the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is no work prescribed for me. But yet I am engaged in my prescribed duties because of the same reason. Right? In 3 verses he will expand on this same reason. That people will try to imitate me if I was to give up my prescribed duties. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a description of Krishna in Dwarka, where he was very conscious of his duties. He would get up in the morning, perform the Sandhya Vandanam, perform Surya Namaskar, and then he would give in charity, and he was very, very conscientiously executing his duties as a Kshatriya, as a king, as an advisor, etc. In Mahabharata, Krishna tells Arjun that like any other husband, he's always anxious to please his wives, and like any other member of the royal family, he's always anxious to please the king. Right? So Krishna is now saying, I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, am performing my obligatory duties. So, more so for anybody else. Okay, next verse. Okay, verse 23. Yadi hayam na varteyam jatu karnaya tandritaha mam vartamanu vartante manushya partha sarvashaha. For if I ever fail to engage in carefully performing prescribed duties, O Partha, certainly all men would follow my path. So in the previous verse, Krishna had noted how even though he was not in the need of anything, he performed his prescribed duties. Here he says why. That because if I fail to engage in my prescribed duties, all men would certainly follow my path. Next verse. Verse 24. Utsi deorime loka na kuryam karma chedaham shankarasya cha kartashyam upanyam imaha prajaha. If I did not perform prescribed duties, all these worlds would be put to ruination. I would be the cause of creating unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of all living beings. So Krishna is bringing to Arjun's attention the dire consequences of great personalities not following the prescribed duties. So if you remember in the first chapter, verse 40 to 42, Arjun had spoken about Varna Sankar, that he would be the cause of the destruction of the society. Krishna here is saying that by not performing prescribed duties, he says, I would be the cause of creating unwanted population. Because the Vedic injunctions are meant to establish the principles of morality. And when one is deviating from them, then there is the lack, the dilution of morality, which creates unwanted population. Now, one thing important to note here is that there are also instances when the activities of Krishna are not meant to be imitated. Specifically, Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, where externally they seem to be immoral. Like we see Krishna is stealing, he's consorting with the wives of others, he tells lies, cheats. So then one might say, well, I'm just following Krishna's instructions. So Sukadeva Goswami, he explains this in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, that the statement of the Lord's empowered servants are always true, and the acts they perform are exemplary when consistent with those statements. Right? So there is this distinction between Kathani and Karani. So Katha is speech and Karani is acts. So what they say must always be followed, and what they do must be followed when it is consistent with what they say. Right? And Sukadeva Goswami gives the example of one who is not a great controller should never imitate the behavior of ruling personalities, even mentally. If out of foolishness an ordinary person does imitate such behavior, he will simply destroy himself, just as a person who is not Rudra would destroy himself if he tried to drink an ocean of poison. So this is a very apt example, because in India we see many people who claim to be followers of Lord Shiva and take intoxicants. Now, of course, Lord Shiva never takes intoxicants. But the point that is made here is that Lord Shiva, during the churning of the ocean, did drink the poison, the ocean of poison, the halahal poison. But that does not mean that other people follow him, saying Lord Shiva is drinking poison, so let me also drink poison in terms of intoxicants. Or people say that Krishna was dancing with the gopis, so let me try and have many girlfriends and dance with them, right? So, when great personalities are there, their kathani, their words should be followed, their instructions should be followed, and the karani, their action should be followed when it is consistent with the kathani. When it is not, then it should not be followed. Why? Because the understanding that the great personalities are bound often by a different set of rules. So why was Krishna acting the way that he was in Vrindavan? For the pleasure of his devotees. So because they were devotees who wanted to see Krishna in that form, as a butter thief, in the parakriya bhava, in the mood of a relationship outside marriage, so that to respond to that mood of his devotees, Krishna does this. But he never says, in all the statements that Krishna makes in the Vedas, in the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna never endorses this. So similarly, when Lord Shiva drank the ocean of poison, he drank it as a service to Krishna and to the devotees. But Lord Shiva never says that just like I am drinking poison, you should also drink poison. That is why it is important to take shelter of a guru. Because the guru can help you understand the difference between preaching by words and preaching by action. And the guru can also inspire you by both, by instructing and by following his own instructions. So in the next 8 verses, Krishna will explain how a detached man in knowledge should relate to an attached man in ignorance. And that we will do in our next discussion. We will stop over here. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.